God is a woman. Do you know how I know? As I said, our theme this month is celebrating the divine feminine. And my talk is, what sex is your God? And she's changed her mind 4 times since Wednesday, including twice this morning, on what this talk was going to be about. When we think about religion, we think about the different faith traditions, and primarily our main focus usually goes to the 2 largest ones. Descendants of Abraham, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, of course. And each of these has one God, right? And it's a male God. Yes? Yes, it's a male God. Many of us were raised in those traditions. But when we go back a little further, let's say to the ancient Greeks and Romans, they had lots of gods, didn't they? They had men and they had women and they had partiers, Bacchus, right? They had gods of the sun and gods of the moon and gods above and gods below. Lots and lots and lots of gods representing all of the aspects, tendencies of the one God. And then we see it reflected in Hinduism. I think there's 33 million gods and goddesses in Hinduism. You got one for everything. You can certainly find a God in that, right? 33 million to choose from. Men, women, combinations of the 2, animals, combinations of animals and humans. You got it all. You can always find one. Buddhism, not a religion per se, but yet it's got lots of deities, right? You've got Buddhas, Bodhisattva, yes, those guys, 21 Taras, and we see multiple gods in many of the native faith traditions as well, don't we? Throughout our culture and around the world. All trying to represent the aspects of the divine, the many facets of the divine. Our own science of mind teaches oneness, wholeness, one God, and one mind, one life. But again, I ask, what sex, what gender is your God? Most of us have a male perspective of that. From what I hear in community, most of us have a masculine, patriarchal, fatherly sort of perception of that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to suggest that we might want to have a bigger idea of God, an expanded idea of what God is. In the words of Richard Dreyfuss, we need a bigger boat, right? Remember Jaws? Yeah. God is female and male and trans and non-gender and gay and bi and plant and animal and rock and atom and everything. God is all. That's our teaching, isn't it? All is all. It's not all except, it's all. God is all. The divine is an energy, isn't it? The divine is an energy, a power, and the divine feminine is an attribute of God, not a gender. Not a gender. Viewing God as having a specific single gender limits us and all that God is. It limits us. And we're missing out on that divine feminine principle. God is both the masculine and the feminine. And our teaching symbol, remember that? It's the circle. It's got the 2 lines in it. The top part, God, seed. The middle part is the law, the soil. Well, in that teaching symbol, if you look in the back of the textbook, Dr. Holmes, the founder and the author of that, puts in the top part masculine to describe that. And he's not saying necessarily that God is masculine. It's the principle, it's the activity of the thought of the divine. It's the seed. But in the law, he uses the word feminine, the receptive. The receptive. So the seed goes into the soil, doesn't it? And the soil does what? It nurtures, which is a feminine tendency. Not that men don't, But it's the feminine nature of the male that does that. We all have both masculine and feminine tendencies, as does the divine. As does the divine. Much like you've seen, I'm sure, the yin and yang symbol in Eastern traditions. It's a balance of black and white, dark and light, yin and yang, the energy. So getting ourselves to the place of embodying this idea might take some time, because most of us were raised in those childhood beliefs. I remember going to the Methodist church. We had a big old stained glass window, beautiful, and it had Jesus, and it was up high, and every Sunday in the pews, Jesus was looking down at us, and I always thought he was taking attendance, making sure I was there, right? Yeah, making sure I was there. And I kind of began to get that whole thing of the idea of God, of my teaching and of what I learned, mixed up with Santa Claus, because it sounded the same. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, and he's writing down your mistakes. Right? And you'll get a lump of coal, or he'll send you straight to hell. You know, your choice. But that's how I got it all kind of mixed up in my mind. And I've heard the concept of Santa God. And sometimes we think about it that way, that it is this, oh, please, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good if you'll give me this. Right? We get tangled up in some of those old thoughts. Many people carry those beliefs with them throughout their lives. Some of us have gone on a spiritual quest, a spiritual journey to transform these ideas to a more loving concept of God, and to bring that guy in the sky on the throne with the long white beard and the list into our hearts, and to not have those such limiting beliefs any longer. Because in this teaching we teach what? That God is in, through, and as us. And when we limit God to this much, God is a guy and this is all it is, that's all we can receive. We can't receive that multitude of beingness that Spirit is. All of life, all of the all that it is. Because we get to say how much of it we experience, don't we? We have this beautiful thing called freedom of choice. And we get to choose how receptive we're going to be to it. Opening our minds to the divine feminine aspects of God is a good first step to cracking those limiting beliefs. Because that may be real startling to some people, that God's not a guy. God's not a guy. And even when we teach in Science of Mind that it's energy, it is a presence, there can still be that residual thinking from our childhood of it still being that patriarchal energy, can't it? It can still feel that way to us. I believe, as I said, that the limitations we put on God are the limitations that we put on ourselves. And when we put these small human qualities and personality traits on God, we limit its infinite nature. When I have come to understand the infinite Spirit, the source, the loving presence, that it's love itself, not personality, not gender, I've also come to realize that it's very generous, very generous. I realized yesterday, I've had a busy week, and schedule got rearranged and things have been going on, and I had a workshop yesterday. We had a beautiful workshop with the foundation students for our spiritual mind treatment, and so I wasn't in my normal routine for putting the talk together. And as I was reviewing it yesterday afternoon after I got home, I realized I didn't have a story, and I thought, well, that's just odd. I always have a story, right? The talk always works me during the week, and I just didn't have a story. And as I thought about it, it was like, oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. You see, I went into Ulta Cosmetics on Friday, and I had run out of a product that I use, and I went in, and I couldn't find it. They didn't have it. So I was a little frustrated because I'd already stopped at another Ulta, and they didn't have it either. So I left that store and I went to the other store. And so now I'm in search of a salesperson. And so I'm looking around, I can't find anybody. I spot a couple of salespeople across the way, and I walk over and I turn around and I said, do you work here? And they said, yes, we do. And what can you help me with? And I said, well, I'm looking for blah, blah, blah. And they said, okay, let me help you. And off we go. And the first thing I noticed is his beautiful makeup. Now, I was surprised. I'd never seen a man working at Ulta before. I was impressed by his makeup. Holy smokes, he could give me lessons. He was the nicest, kindest, most helpful person that I have ever worked with at that store. He walked me over, he looked through everything, he couldn't find anything. I said, do you have a recommendation? He took me through a couple of things. I was like, no, that's not right. So he said, I've got one more thing, let me show you this. It's what I use. We walked over to the other side, he showed me what it was. He demonstrated it for me beautifully. Kind, helpful, generous, beautiful person. He'd shaved his head. He's telling me about shaving his head, how he'd had conversations with his dad growing up about how he was going to lose his hair. And he says, look what I've done. Now I've lost my hair and I have to shave my head. But it was a fascinating experience. I felt helped, blessed, heard. I bought my product and I got in the car and I thought about that experience. And I thought, isn't this interesting how Spirit shows up for me as the divine feminine and masculine in one person to show me God expressing as both. It was because I'm old school in stereotypes, right? We have stereotypes. He wasn't fitting my stereotype, and yet I found myself curious, inquisitive, wanting to get to know him, wanting to understand how he got that application to look so stinking good, right? Girls, you know what I'm talking about. So it was a fascinating thing, and I look at that as a generosity of Spirit, because Spirit was giving to me when I didn't even know I needed it. Because on Friday, I didn't know I needed a story. It wasn't even in my consciousness that I was looking for a story, but I walked into the store, and there is God saying, hi, let me show you what this looks like. Let me give you your story for your talk on Sunday. I didn't know I needed it, but it was given to me before I even asked. That's how Spirit works. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, it was a beautiful story, and he's a beautiful human being. I highly recommend him. Anyway, so Science of Mind teaches us wholeness, and to be whole means we include all, doesn't it? It's all in there, and we're in there. Well, again, the limits we put on ourselves, on God, are the limits that we put on ourselves. How are you limiting yourself through the limited view that you have of the divine? Can you open yourself up to the 33 million, at least, concepts of the divine? Ernest Holmes, the founder of Centers for Spiritual Living, the author of The Science of Mind, has a perfect quote for this. He says, if our human relations are to mean the most to us, we must sense that there is hidden within, around, and through us, each, a divine presence manifesting itself in infinite variations, the same impulse, the same love and life, but never quite alike in any two persons. Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness. By expanding our concepts of the divine, we can expand our concepts of ourself, can't we? We can expand our concepts of ourself. The divine feminine and the sacred masculine, that's what we're talking about all month, and it flows through all of us. We all have all of it. It's how we use the creative process, consciously or unconsciously, in our lives. The masculine concept is the idea, it is the thought, it is the seed. The female is the receptive and the nurturing part. If we plant those carrot seeds, we've got to nurture them, don't we? It's not just about the planting, it's also about the nurturing. It's also about the nurturing. So let's move into our practicing the principles this week. And I've got a couple, actually I've got 3 of them for us. The first is intentional meditation practices. Now, I know we talk a lot about meditation, but I want to invite you to try something a little different in your meditation practice this week. And it's focusing on letting go of your idea of gender. And it's just a whole letting go type of meditation, where you begin to guide yourself into letting go of your gender. Letting go of any gender. What would my experience in the world be if I had no gender? And then letting go of maybe of the bodysuit that we wear, and allowing your soul and your spirit to be free, and your imagination of what would that be if I wasn't burdened by gender beliefs. What would my life be like? What would it be? Think of that. As Rumi said, when you lose all sense of self, the bonds of a thousand chains will vanish. Lose yourself completely. Return to the root of your own soul. The second is to notice the creative process in your work. As I said, when you plant carrots in the soil, we get carrots. We're not going to get tomatoes or watermelons. We're going to get carrots. And the same is true with our thinking. Our thoughts are the seeds of our experience of tomorrow. What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about today that you're going to see manifested tomorrow, next week, next year? Is it what you truly desire? We must nurture the soil and the seeds of our thought as well. We planted a lot of seeds in January, didn't we? Most of us had intentions that we set for the year. Are you nurturing those? Are you nurturing those? Paying attention to them every day, treating for them? Yeah. And number 3, know that you and your life are the leading edge of consciousness. We are constantly expanding and evolving and growing in our awareness of life. Would you agree? Yeah, we're continuing to evolve, and we are that leading edge of consciousness. And I think that the changes that we're seeing in society today with women has been evolving for centuries. These seeds have been planted for centuries, and we're starting to see the green sprouts of them now. And recently, we've seen much of the inequity of the feminine splashed across our screens. We've seen it splashed across our screens. And we are seeing power and courage and beauty emerge in feminine roles. And we've seen the ugly in both the male and the female, have we not? Yeah, we've seen it all. We've seen the diversity of it all. But we've also seen the beauty. We've seen the beauty. And we have to know that life is unfolding exactly as it should to continue our evolutionary expansion. The world may look a little chaotic. No? Yeah, it may look a little chaotic. But we can find balance when we can be still and know that it is God. I want to close this today with a quote from Emma Watson. She says, "It's time that we see gender as a spectrum instead of 2 sets of opposing ideals." And I think it starts with our concept of the divine. It starts with our concept of the divine. Holmes advised us that the life that includes the most experiences the most. So I wish you a very super inclusive week ahead. So thank you for being here today and for being willing to open to a bigger definition of spirit in your life. Shall we pray? So as we go within to that place of stillness within us, we recognize that there is one life. That life is God, and she is gorgeous. We recognize her as the power and the presence that is in, through, and as all that is, has ever been, and ever shall be. It is the divine feminine. It is the sacred masculine. It is everything in between and beyond. And as I know this infinite power and presence, I know that I am that which it is. I am created of it. And as I know that of myself, I know that of each and every one of us, that we are expressions of this divine wisdom, this divine intelligence, the sacred masculine, the divine feminine. And so I speak my word for and about each of us here today, knowing that as we step into this realization of the one, of the diversity, of the inclusivity, of the multiplicity that is all contained in the one, and that we are in there as well with all of that diversity, inclusivity, multiplicity, the masculine, the feminine. It's all God, it's all good, it's all us. And so I know for anyone that has anything on their heart this day that they are seeking prayer around, that as they lift that into their conscious awareness, we know the healing, we know the clarity, we know the solution, we know whatever the need is, it is fulfilled in this moment. For the word spoken is the word made manifest. It is done unto us as we believe, and we believe in the wholeness of life, expressing through each of us. And so how grateful I am for this knowing, for the manifestation of this prayer, that I gratefully and joyfully release it into the action of mind and the action of law, knowing that it is done, it is so. And we affirm this together by saying, and so it is.